are going to wrap up chapter 2 of the book of Esther. And that will see us going from verse 19 to verse 23. All right. Last week we did look at the first 18 verses and their significance. And today we are going to do the last few verses. Doing this study, affords me the opportunity of exploring things and pursuing information, because I can't just come with my head empty. And so today we are going to look at a significant part of this passage. The passage is pretty straightforward. It's very straightforward. And so the things that have been highlighted, that I would have highlighted, is the fact that from a recap standpoint, verses 19 and 20, where Mordecai insists that Esther do not reveal her true background and her identity. And one of the things that came out of the review is that even though Mordecai told Esther not to reveal her identity and family background, somehow Mordecai, or it appears that Mordecai's nationality was known. His nationality was known. There's one speculation that that is the case. So we see in verses 19 and 20 a review, or a restating of the fact that he did instruct her not to disclose her identity, which she honored. One of the things I want to highlight here, and I think I would have done it in the last week, and that is the significance of male and female working together. Male and female working together to accomplish God's will. Mordecai could not have done it on his own, and Esther could not have done it on her own, because the Lord was leading Esther through the leadership of Mordecai, at least up to this point. At least up to this point, yes, God was talking to Esther, God was leading Esther, but Mordecai played a major role in him doing so. And so we see the triad taking place here, where man, woman, and God operating together to the greater good of his kingdom. And so sometimes when the argument about gender and whether or not women should do certain things or take certain roles, it's understood culturally based on the time that they were in, but it never stopped God from using women never stopped God from using women to do significant things, to do things that impacts or benefits his greater good, his kingdom. And so the whole matter of women in leadership, women in certain roles in the church, it's still argued. It's still argued. But as we look at history, even looking at history, we see where God has used women in in ways that advance his kingdom, even in leadership roles. Um, one of the things that one of the events that I like is with Abigail, and Abigail was David's wife, and how she became his wife is that she was married to a man who refused to comply to David's command, and David leading the army um, insisted that he did certain things, but he refused. And Abigail went behind his back, not advocating for wives to go behind husbands' back to do anything. But sometimes, as husbands, we make dumb decisions, and as wives, you may have to do things that is in our best interest, even behind our back. But I'm not advocating for wives to go behind her husband's back to do anything. But in this case, Abigail did that, and out of that action, well, the man's family was saved, his property was saved. So God has used women in tremendous ways, and the value that women play in God's kingdom must never be overlooked or undermined, even in the face of what is culturally accepted. Even in the face of what is culturally accepted. And we see this playing out here again, where it was a woman in leadership, because she was the queen, so that means she was a woman in leadership, and so God was able to use her. So, women continue to play a major role in the work of God even today. And so we cannot underestimate or devalue women and how God used them in our churches today. So as I said, we see the triad taking place here. The Mordecai, Esther, and God working together. What I want us to focus on this afternoon is verses 21 and 22. Verses 21 and 22. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, two of the king's officers who were guarding the doorway became angry and conspired to assassinate the king. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And what I want us to focus on today is the king's gate. The king's gate. The remaining, the remainder of the passage is pretty straightforward. You have two disgruntled guards, and I suspect that they may not be the only ones who were dissatisfied or disgruntled. For whatever reason, it wasn't stated here the motive behind them wanting to kill the king was not stated. But what is stated is that they were angry at something and they wanted to do away with the king. But all of this happened at the king's gate. All of this happened at the king's gate. Let me, all right, so I'm gonna try to show you, screen share, let me see if I can do this. All right, the portion. Oh boy, where's that thing now? Where's that thing? Where's that thing? Where's that thing? Give me a minute and let me find this thing for you. I'm looking for. Whew. All right. All right. Just give me one moment. Let me see if I could share this thing for you. Screen share. Advance. We just need a portion. All right. Okay, so on your screen is an image of the king's palace. And if you look right here, right, so you're seeing me right here, this is the king's gate. So this is the king's gate. All right, and so this is where all that activity transpired. So what do we know about the king's gate? Let me end this. All right. So what do we know about the king's gate? Well, based on my research, the king's gate covered about 13,000 square foot of space. Around 13,000 square foot of space. For those of us who live in Trinidad, a lot of land is, the average lot of land is 5,000 square feet. So that would be a little over 2.5 lots of land. Literally over 2.5 lots of land. So that was the size of the king's gate. So it was not just a ginormous gate, but it was actually a building. It was actually a building. All right. The measurement was 130 feet by 100 feet. So it's 130 feet by 100 feet. The size of the wall is estimated to be 10 feet thick. It was estimated to be 10 feet thick. And it was made from mud brick. The height was between 30 feet to 50 feet. So the height was between 30 to 50 feet. And it had a moat in front of it, which is a deep trench, which is usually filled with water. And it had a bridge. It had a bridge, and that is to connect the palace to the city from that from that part of the palace. It was not the only gate. Well, you had the city gate, but it was not the only gate leading to the palace. However, this particular gate was reserved for the king. So it was the king's gate. So it was a private gate, and based on some of the drawings that I looked at, this particular gate led to the throne room. This particular gate led to the throne room. Access to this gate was reserved, as I said, to the king. He gave command as to when it's supposed to be open and when it's supposed to be closed. And the persons working there were not random soldiers. They were not, just sent two persons there to guard there. The persons there were specially selected. As one writer describes it, they were wisely selected. So Mordecai being there, in my opinion, was not coincidental. Which suggests that Mordecai may have had some low-level importance. Let me say low-level importance, which is separate and apart from, commoners. All right? It is believed that he was either a armed guard, he was one of the armed guards there, or he was one of the officials who controlled the exit and access, and he may have been one of the judges who had the responsibility of adjudicating matters that may arise, that people may have, who comes to the king to get the king's attention, but they deal with it there. So they could have, they would deal with it there. And so the gate represented the authority of the king. The gate represented the authority of the king. And the question as to why or how Mordecai got information about the conspiracy to kill the conspiring, to kill the king was unknown. Nevertheless, he was there to perform a task. And we can look at it from two standpoints. He was there to perform a task in terms of his human duty. But there is also a spiritual aspect to that as well, which emphasizes the importance that we as God's people, even in what we think is material or a professional position or everyday duties and responsibilities, we must always remember that because we are Christians, there's some spiritual purpose to our existence. There's some divine purpose to our existence. Mordecai was there. Whatever his role was, from a human standpoint, there was a greater purpose for him to be there. And even though God is not mentioned in the book of Esther, we cannot ignore the role and the purpose of God in guiding and leading and commanding and directing Mordecai to the position that he was in. So we know about the gate, the king's gate. We understand what its purpose. We cannot definitively say how Mordecai got there, what he was doing there, and how he got wind of what was happening. But we know that it happened. We know that it happened. However, we, as I said before, understand that there is some spiritual significance to him being there. And so the question is asked, what is the significance? What is the significance of the king's gate? Well, in the case of Mordecai, we see that God exposed the conspiring to kill the king at the king's gate. We also see him using Mordecai at this point to advance his position in the kingdom that he was now exiled in. The king's gate belongs to the king. Yes. When we look at this king, we have to look beyond the human king, because God is operating at the king's gate. And so we have to see beyond just the mortal, mundane, human authority and see that at the king's gate, God is king. I wonder if I'm making sense. God is king. It is his gate. I want you to turn your Bibles with me to Ezekiel. You turn your Bibles with me to Ezekiel chapter 44. All right. So when we look at Ezekiel 44, we see God stating claim. We see God stating claim and establishing his authority at the king's gate over the king's gate. All right? And so keep in mind, this particular text is in reference to the new kingdom that God is intending to establish. And when we look at the passage, we see God making some profound statement regarding the king's gate. Then he brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces towards the east, but it was shut. And the Lord said to me, the gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter it, because the Lord God of Israel has entered by it, therefore it shall be shut. As for the prince, because he is the prince, he may sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by the way of the vestibule of the gate and go out the same way. So we see here God stating claim of the gate as his gate, which no one else, not even the prince, he can go inside the building to eat, but he cannot enter through the main gate of the king. So he can go into the building, but he cannot enter through the main gate. He has to find an alternative route. So the spiritual significance here is that even though Zaris was king, we see God establishing himself through Mordecai. He's establishing himself through Mordecai as the person in charge of whatever happens to his people. He is in charge. The promise, the covenant made was, you will be my people, and what? I will be your God. Therefore, worshippers of God are God's people, and he is king. So whatsoever happens to them has to come from, whatever happens to them, that order has to come from him. And so from a spiritual standpoint, we see God operating through Mordecai to establish his kingship in protecting and redeeming his people. So that's one spiritual significance. There is another spiritual significance. And when we look at Esther, we go back to Ezekiel. Don't leave Ezekiel. We're going back to Ezekiel. And that is Ezekiel 46. When we go back to Ezekiel 46, we see another aspect of spiritual significance. What that is, when we read verses 1 to 8, we see the sovereign Lord establishing certain rules, certain guidelines, and certain practices that are necessary. So we spoke about him having control of who uses the gate, and him establishing his kingship over his people. And so we see here he talks about on the sixth day, on the sixth day the gate shall be shut, but on the seventh it shall be open. On the day of the new moon it shall be open. But what's one of the primary significance of that gate being open? One of the primary significance is that they will come and worship him at that gate. And verse 3, on the Sabbath and new moon, the people of the land are to worship me in the presence of the Lord at the entrance of that gateway. At the entrance of that gateway. And the passage, the verses continue by telling us what was required, what must be sacrificed, what must be brought as offering. When we go back to Mordecai, we can see this expression of worship. We can see this expression of worship in that it was not lamb, it was not dove, it was not grains, but Mordecai put his life on the line. Mordecai put his life on the line. So in a sense, he became the sacrifice of worship. If we see worship as more than just words or singing a song or playing instrument, but worship is a means of sacrificing our lives for the greater good of God's people, then we can see Mordecai here putting his life on the line in two ways. One, keep in mind that Esther had told the king Mordecai brought the information. What followed was an investigation. What if after the investigation they had found that it was a lie? That means Mordecai is dead. It's as simple as that. The other aspect of it is those who were conspiring to kill the king could have easily well turned and killed Mordecai. So we see the establishing of worship by Mordecai at the king's gate. His act of worship was to protect the king, because the Bible tells us that we have a responsibility to honor our leaders, and two, ultimately, his actions would lead to the people of God being saved. The people of God being saved. And the Bible tells us that if you do this to the least of one of my people, you do it unto me. So my friends, at the city gate, God established himself as king. Mordecai worshiped the king at the city gate through taking decisive actions. He did what was right, and out of that, God's people prospered. God's people benefited. And so the passage provides us with what happened, but we had to go beyond, because it's not just a physical thing. And I'm going to repeat myself here. Even in our ordinary affairs, our everyday chores, our everyday doings, we have to understand that there is some spiritual significance. There's some spiritual significance. And we may not need to go in search of finding out what that spiritual significance is. By simply doing what God commands us by simply doing what is right and bringing attention to God is our spiritual duty and our act of worship, as Paul talks about in Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2. Offering our bodies as what? Living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is our spiritual, truthful, righteous act of worship.